How's it going, everybody? Marcos Arno here, Christ Center Capital. Um, this video is going to be about the somewhat of a bombshell that we dropped, last week on our post about the stock market being immoral and both lending money at interest being immoral. We got a lot of positive feedback, to my surprise, on that article. We've had our fair share of objectors. We never get a lot of comments on posts or anything, but we always get a lot of emails. That inbox at support at christcentercapital.com got flooded more than usual when we dropped this post. And I'm glad because I really want people to be thinking and praying and discerning about the stock market, about usury, about lending money at interest, and about the way the Christian should be interacting with wealth and finance. I think it's really important. So I'm glad the article was thought provoking, to say the least. Now, quick tangent before we get into the article. I believe that if you take advice from someone, whether that be financial, moral, philosophical, you should know who that person is on some kind of level. Um, a lot of you guys probably have no idea who I am or who the people behind Christ Center Capital are, but I'm the main contributor. I'm the owner, obviously. Uh, and the Coming Home Network just published my conversion story, which I can take you to right now. The Coming Catholicism Was My Enemy. That was the title. This is my conversion story. It tells a little bit about my upbringing, tells a little bit about my conversion, my time with atheism, my time and journey through atheism, what brought me to the faith both intellectually and spiritually, and then also uh, kind of how it's impacted my personal life and my professional life. So if you want to get to know me better, which if you're taking advice from me, I think you should. If you want to get to know me better, definitely go check out that article on the Coming Home Network. I'll post a link in the description below. But and then one other thing I want to say is I really, really welcome any kind of comments or feedback about the post or on this video. That is as honest as I can be, as sincere as I can be. Like, I really want feedback on this. This has been a year-long journey. I left the NBA over a year ago now. Started Christ Center Capital. Christ Center Capital is 13 months old at this point, and yeah, I would really love the feedback. Like, if you are an objector, or if you think I could make the case stronger, or if maybe you have a silver bullet that defeats my arguments, I'm all for it. Please let us know. Reach out, and people should know too. Um, with all that being said, let's jump into it. Right, I'll take you over to the article. So, title of the article is "Let's Be Honest," because this is a little stock market is not moral, a little clickbaity, right? Um, Let's be honest is the title of this article. The reason that's the title is because it took me a while to finally come to an honest conclusion of how I truly felt about the stock market, because it has been a means of providing for my family for so long. Now, I'm not gonna spend too long on this article because it's just a bunch of words. I'll talk more about it. The 2 points I bring up in the article, C3 brings up in the article, is it is always wrong to charge interest on a loan, and the stock market is immoral. Those are the two statements that are made, and I'll just read this very first paragraph here. You may be thinking that if we follow these two ideas to their logical ends, we will forfeit all economic prosperity that has been achieved thus far and any economic prosperity that will be achieved in the future. And my answer to that is maybe. However, before you dismiss me as a lunatic, I beg you to please read the rest of this short post. All right. Now, the post itself is about 5,000 words, probably takes about 10 to 15 minutes to read, and probably a lot longer to digest. But, and I may be a lunatic. I'm not doubting that for a second. I may be a lunatic, but I really just encourage you, just take your couple minutes, and discern whether or not this article is um, speaking truth or if it's flawed. Because if it's speaking truth, then the way that we have come to think about money and the world of finance has caused a lot of ill. All right. Now, first topic, usury, right? Most people think of usury as like, back in the day, money was a barren asset. You charge interest on a loan, and they can never actually get out of debt. And now today, usury is thought of as like if someone were to charge like 500% or 1,000% interest or something ridiculous that no one actually does. Um, we lend money at interest all the time now in today's world. And the church hasn't explicitly condemned it, but it has had some magisterial documents come out against it very strongly. Going back to the article really quickly, we have the Bible talking on usury. This is the church talking on usury. The session 5 of the Fifth Lateran Council says, "For that is the real meaning of usury, when from its use a thing which produces nothing is applied to the acquiring of gain and profit without any work, any expense, or any risk." That pretty much sums up lending money at interest because you're not really producing anything. Um, and then the papal encyclical by Pope Benedict XIV in 1745 says, "One cannot condone the sin of usury by arguing that the gain is not great or excessive, but rather moderate or small. Neither can it be condoned by arguing that the borrower is rich, nor even by arguing that the money borrowed is not left idle." All right. Then it goes into C3 thoughts and everything, which we'll talk about. There's a bunch of objections we lay out and our answers to those objections. Some of the objections are like, are you dismissing all the economic prosperity we've ever gotten? Nobody will ever lend money anymore. Can we still charge rates of inflation and rates of interest in accordance with inflation? Can we still charge late fees and everything? And I'll detail all those really quickly. Remember, economic prosperity is not the goal. Actually, at the beginning of the article, we ask a couple questions that we want people to have on the forefronts of their minds as they discern this information. Question number 1: what is the goal? You can see it here in this video, right? Up. Always get that wrong, right? Um, what is the goal of this life? Is it economic prosperity and abundance, or is it heaven? Something we really got to think about. Also, we're greedy creatures. We're a greedy humanity, but does that mean we should prop up greedy mechanisms? Or should we attempt to correct our nature? And the big question here, one of the big questions is it ever okay to take profits without doing any real work? That's a big one. And it's the number one question, really. Is it ever okay to reap where you have not sown? And what is reaping where you have not sown? Now, again, C3 goes through a bunch of thoughts here, and we go through objections and answers to those objections. One of the ones like, is it okay to charge rates of interest at the rate of inflation? We think, yeah, it's okay. If you give $10,000 to someone and they're supposed to pay you back in 2 years, and $10,000 is now worth $11,000, yeah, they should pay you back what you gave. That's okay. It's not actually interest. You're just getting back what you gave. That could also work in reverse if there's deflation or anything like that. You could give 10,000, only get 9,500 back. Or the late fees, as long as they're not like completely arbitrary, yeah, late fees are fine. It's an agreement. If I lend you this money, you gotta at least pay it back at X date or Y date or whatever. Again, neither of those things are interest, so they don't really factor in. The big question is like, are we just missing economic prosperity, all this abundance that we have? And yeah, maybe we are. But there's a couple things to that. One, do we really think that lending money at interest is the only way that we've ever been able to produce economic prosperity? Is there no other way? Can honest people operating within a free market not also produce economic prosperity? And Is all the economic prosperity we've produced actually a good? Sure, we may have fed more bellies or put more roofs over our heads, but have we improved the moral state of society? Have we grown more focused on the eternal goal of heaven or less? And I don't think anyone can argue that a society that sacrifices their children at the altar of convenience or tries to transition little boys into little girls and vice versa, or tries to or promotes greed as a virtue, or does any of these crazy things that we do in society today, I don't think anyone can argue that we're living in a more morally just society because of our economic abundance, and definitely not in spite of it. And also think about the decay of the family and the bleeding of the church, right? Once upon a time, we would rely on our families and our church communities to help us start businesses or buy homes or everything like that. And now we rely on banks and financial institutions. And yeah, they've produced some economic prosperity, or they've at least facilitated some economic prosperity, but they've also caused a lot of economic collapse. So, when we're talking about lending money at interest, one thing we must talk about is the ends never justify the means, right? The ends justifying the means is a totalitarian ethic, and we as Christians cannot promote or use a totalitarian ethic. The ends can't justify the means. Plus, through history, we know that ends terribly. It usually ends up with murder of millions. So, the ends can't justify the means. So, even if the economic prosperity is good and hasn't played a role in like family decay and church decay, it still is the means that how we got there, is that moral, because that's what's in question, not the ends, not the economic prosperity. It's the means of how you got there. And can anyone really argue that lending money, sitting back doing nothing and expecting a good return on it is morally just? I don't think so. I really don't think so. And now that may have severe economic implications, and that may make life much harder. But remember something: our world today would have us believe that easy and good are synonyms. They are not. They, of course, are not. My dad used to tell me the uh, easy way is usually the bad thing, and the hard way is usually the good thing. There's a lot of wisdom in that because, again, our world today teaches us that easy and good are synonyms, and they're not. Just because something is easy does not mean it is morally good. And I think that's the trap we fall into. Yeah, we all have cars, we all have iPhones, we all have houses, we all, you know, have abundance of food or whatever it is. But and it's made life very easy. But is life good in the true Christian theological sense? Is it more morally just? No, it's not. Now, we could produce economic abundance and still have our sights set on heaven. That's possible. Maybe it's possible. But this is not the case. And we know a tree by its fruits. And right now we have the lending at interest and the stock market as a whole, too. We're going to get to the stock market in a little bit. But they make us rely on banks and financial institutions and not families or churches. And this has, separated us and isolated us. And we may have cars and houses, but we have more anxiety and depression and suicide. We may have good food, but our families are separated. We may have, iPhones and all the latest tech, but our lives are in moral decay. And these trade-offs, I don't think, are something that we should embrace. But the root question still is it ever okay to reap where you have not sown? Do no work, but receive a profit. And from a Christian perspective, the answer is pretty simple: no. And our, Pope Benedict XIV, the fifth session of the Lateran Council, and a bunch of other statements have pretty much said like usury, charging interest on loans is not okay. It's not a Christian thing to do. Now, moving on, and I know there's probably a million questions that people have on this. I encourage you to read the article, spend time in prayer, do a little research of your own, and just try to come to the honest conclusion there. But I'm going to move on. We're going to go to the stock market. Actually, before I move on, I'll read the last paragraph that we have. Um, I'll take you back to the site. The last paragraph we have on the topic of charging interest on loans is right here. Maybe after all that, you are still convinced that lending money is a service and deserves some sort of compensation, and you do not care what the church or C3 has to say on the matter. The question would remain as to why you are an advocate for charging interest on loans. Is it because you want the ability to buy cars? Is it because that is how you make a living and you do not want to change professions? Is it because you love the perceived economic prosperity that has played a role in facilitating? Even if these are the reasons you want to keep up the practice of usury, they do not answer the most important question. Is it moral to charge interest on loans? Is it moral to give in your abundance, do no real work, and demand a return from someone who was in need? That's the question we got to ask ourselves, right? Now, moving on to the stock market. I'll admit charging interest on loans is a bit muddied for me. Like, it took a little bit more convincing. I am convinced of it, but I can understand the arguments. And I put a lot of objections and arguments in the post that you can go and read. The stock market was a little bit more clear cut because when we talk about the stock market, a lot of people don't actually understand how it works. When a company initially IPOs and they have their initial share offerings, the only people allowed to buy those are institutional investors and hedge fund managers and people close to the company. The everyday retail investor with their Robinhood app does not get to buy those shares. And the people who buy those initial shares, that's the only time the company itself actually receives capital. Those institutional investors then take those shares to the secondary market where, all the rest of the population exists and can buy them. And what they're doing is they're buying something with, say, Tesla's name on it, but they're not actually giving any money to Tesla. They're giving money to the investor, the individual investor. When I sell my Tesla stock, someone else buys it and they're just buying it from me. They're giving me money. They're not giving anything to Tesla. The only thing buying a stock of a company does for the company is brand recognition. Now, of course, we should not be promoting the brand of immoral companies, but you say, oh, so I'm only going to buy and promote the brand of good companies. Well, hold on a second, because if you want to promote the brand of a morally just company, I mean, send them money yourself or put a bumper sticker on your car, promote it to friends and families. Heck, make a social media post, right? The company would be very grateful for that. All those things. And it would do far more for them in promoting their brand. The only real practical reason why someone would buy a stock is because they want to receive a profit later. You want to buy low, sell high, earn a profit without doing any work. Same thing is the same real root problem as usury, lending money at interest. You want to earn a profit without doing any actual work. Now, some people will say, like, lending money, there's people out there that write up the contracts and people out there who, judge the risk and everything like that. And you're just creating services for something that does nothing, right? No one thinks that lending money and receiving a return on it without doing any actual work and buying a stock and selling it at a later date for a profit without doing any actual work is akin to cutting hair or fixing a car or building a house or building a website or anything like that. Like, those things are actual work. Those things are actual services, and buying stocks or lending money at interest are not. They are not doing any work. You're not contributing to society. The only rebuttal really is, well, you're contributing to the economic prosperity of society. And there's a couple questions that you have to ask yourself if you make that point. Is the economic prosperity that the stock market and lending money interest a good, a moral good? Probably not. And also, that's an end, not the means. And the end can't justify the means. Now, all this I know is hard hitting and tough to swallow. It was tough to swallow for me because I was a pretty active investor, and you like look at the business that I run, and even though everything I do is for free, the this is why people need to be, you know, contemplative when it comes to this. They need to take their time. I mean, don't listen to me, some random guy on YouTube and then go out and divest everything. Spend time and see if this is the truth. Really discern, is what I'm saying true? Is what the post is conveying and what Pope Benedict the 14th and, all these other people and documents, everything, is it true? And take some time on that. Seriously, take some time on that. Because we're going against the entire financial system as we know it today and saying that it's immoral. I don't think a lot of people have a hard time believing that, given the world we live in. But it's not exactly easy to detangle yourself and detach yourself from it. And of course, we're not saying that, like, if you're the one, we're saying charging interest is immoral. But if you're someone who is in need of a house and that's the only way you can get a house, like, you're not the one committing the sin. You just have to participate in the world as it is. This is where the stock market is a little bit different because you don't have to participate in the stock market. Some people be like, well, it's the only way I can, provide financial security for my old age. And it's like, even if it was the only way to provide financial security in your old age, there's nothing wrong with being prudent. And I think there's a lot of other different ways to invest. But even if it was the only way, think about that. What if other things that produce economic prosperity were the only way you could provide financial security? I mean, think of the economic prosperity that abortion, pornography, transgender surgeries, prostitution, gambling, all these type of things. Think of all the economic prosperity they produce. They put roofs over heads and food in bellies. And if you lived in a society where that was the only way that you could, investing in those things or doing those things was the only way that you could produce economic security in your old age, and you get to your old age and at 85 you die like everyone else, and you come up to the pearly gates, judgment, and you're like, oh well, I had to commit that abortion. It was or I had to, sell the pornography. It was the only way that I could, pay my bills when I was 70. Do you think that's a good case? And God is like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's okay. Or it was like, doesn't he call us to not be of the world? He calls us to be different. He calls us to step above the depravity of the world because we were living in the enemy's camp. And let's be honest too about something. In the Screw Tape letters, great C.S. Lewis, and Screw Tape is, that's where the bigger demon is advising the lesser demon of how to corrupt souls. And the lesser demon gets really excited because a war is about to break, and he's like, oh, there's going to be blood and carnage and chaos and everything. And the bigger demon, the supervisor demon, is like, be careful because war produces courage in men, and courage is a tool of the enemy being, God, our Lord. And I think the devil is, his tools become more sophisticated because he's like, yeah, blood, carnage, war. I mean, we don't want to kill kids where they can see it. We want to do it in the womb where you can't see it or where it's not as tangible. And then we want to, how do we get people to become lazy and atrophy? And how do we get people to become less moral? And that's what the devil's trying to think about. And like our financial institution, our financial abundance has played a huge role in our moral decay and our moral depravity. Because, I mean, I think, who is it? Father Mike Schmitz tells the story of the Chinese businessman that, was a Catholic underground. He got caught by the CCP and he was tortured and tried to denounce the faith and everything and give up the location of the hidden priest or whatever. And he wouldn't do it. So they eventually let him go. He ends up making his way to America. And so he was like tortured and wouldn't give up the faith, but then he made it to America and became a successful businessman, and then within 5 years he never even attended church anymore. Those are things we got to be aware of, and that's what we're kind of doing. Like, we know when we sit back and do nothing, we atrophy, and that's what the lending money at interest and the stock market is doing to us. We are saying, oh, just put your money here, go relax on the beach, everything will be okay. You'll have your money to pay your bills when you're 70. It's all going to be great. And you don't even have to do anything. And we atrophy. We're comfortable. Security is this great illusion because it doesn't matter if you pay your bills at 75 because we're all going to die. No one beats Father Time. Sorry to be bleak and morbid, but it's the truth. So, I want to take you back to the article. Again, I really want to encourage people to read this article and just spend some time with it. I know it's a little bit more lengthy, um, but the last paragraph here, all right? We're going to read this last paragraph. The stock market and charging interest on loans, usury, are both immoral because they reap where they do not sow, and the former is clearly the sin of speculation as defined by the church. These things have facilitated some economic prosperity, but they have also created economic collapse, caused inflation, separated families, and promoted greed as a virtue. Remember, economic prosperity is not the Christian goal. Heaven is. What good does an abundance of food, homes, cars, and college educations do for us if we have lost sight of eternity? And it is worth repeating the question: are we confident that all the economic prosperity we have experienced in the last few centuries could not be achieved through morally just people operating within a free market? It is conceivable that we could still have houses, cars, and any other good if people were okay with selling their products and accepting overtime payments, and companies just grew steadily and appropriately by making good products and services. Does anyone think that we would all become destitute if moneylenders could not charge interest on a loan and companies could only expand based on how many products or services they sold? Come on, let's be honest. Now, a couple other just small little tangent points. Remember, the stock market's fairly new. Some people would argue that, the church hasn't explicitly condemned it, but I don't think the church needs to explicitly condemn something for us to know that it's immoral, because the world's ever evolving. There's always going to be new things. I mean, the church hasn't explicitly condemned TikTok, but we know that it's immoral. We know that, it's not just a means of communication, because one, it's, short clips, so it doesn't really allow communication, and two, like, there's been studies done by the Wall Street Journal where if it's actively promoting pornography and drug use, right? That's what TikTok does, actively promotes pornography and drug use. Um, we know it's immoral. The church hasn't completely condemned it. Like, the church hasn't condemned, you shouldn't watch, the church has said it's a sin to be on social media for 9 hours a day. But because of, the teachings on sloth and prudence and everything else, we're like, that's probably a sin, right? We don't need them to explicitly condemn something for us to know that it's a sin, because we have our God given reasoning ability. And some may argue, well, the church participates in the stock market. And I mean, again, it's fairly new. The first stock exchange was in Amsterdam in 1621. It didn't gain prominence in the United States until the late 1700s in Philadelphia, and it didn't become actually something that was actively used by the everyday person until really the 1978 formation of the 401k. And the first ETF wasn't even formed until 1990, right? So these things are new, and it's tough to wrap your head around because the enemy has clouded it in a lot of jargon and complications, and every financial advisor is like, oh, don't don't even bother explaining it. Just, tell them put their money here, put their money there. The modern day financial institutions are confusing. And the church itself is focused on saving souls and administering the sacraments. And I think we need to have some grace with it when it comes to the financial world because, I mean, to my knowledge, there's like, 5 people that talk about this kind of thing, and none of them are actually well known. So like we really need to take a step back and like just because the church does something or has not explicitly condemned something does not mean that that thing is moral, right? I think that's pretty obvious if we go through history. So again, the main question you got to ask yourself, the two questions. We'll say two questions. What is the goal of this life, right? That's up there, right? Nope. There we go. What is the goal of this life? Is it heaven or is it economic prosperity? And the second question, is it ever okay to reap where you have not sown? Is it ever okay to do nothing, no actual work, provide no actual service, produce no actual good, and receive a profit for it? I don't think that would sit right with any well formed Christian conscience. But like I said, I'm really excited to hear any kind of feedback that you guys have. Please let me know. Comments, go to the site, read the post, send me an email, whatever it is. I'm excited to hear it. And, happy discerning. I pray that we can all engage in prayer together and come to the truth. God bless. Thank you for listening.